Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this series of video lessons about the key concepts of European history. I'm Miss Jennifer Blank, and I'll be your guide on this journey. This is the first in a series of video lessons, and this is part 1 of 2 for period 1, the years 1450 to 1648. Now, as we go through and cover these things, I'm going to cover them using these big picture key concept ideas. All right, the first 3 we're going to talk about in this video lesson, part 1. So we're going to look at changes in the European worldview. We're going to look at the struggles for sovereignty, and we're also going to look at religious pluralism versus the idea of a unified Europe. The latter 2 will be covered in the next video lesson. So let's start out with key concept 1.1. The worldview of European intellectuals shifted from one based on ecclesiastical and classical authority to one based on inquiry and observation of the natural world. So, we have a revival of classical texts that led to these new methods of scholarship and also new values in both society and in religion. So Italian Renaissance humanists promoted this revival in classical literature, and they created new philological approaches to ancient texts. Now, philological is a fancy way of saying they developed new methods for literary interpretation, basically, but feel free to Google it. Some Renaissance humanists furthered the values of secularism and individualism. These 2 words are very, very important. You should have in your mind a working definition of both. If you don't, I would get on that. Then we also have a humanist revival of Greek and Roman texts. And this was spread by the printing press. It was a big factor in that spread. And these texts, this revival challenged the institutional power of universities and the Roman Catholic Church. And this challenge resulted in the shift of the focus of education away from the theology and in favor of the study of classical texts. So what fundamentally this did was attempt to reduce the church's power and control over scholarship and academia, and really learning in general. Now, admiration for Greek and Roman political institutions also occurred, and this supported a revival of civic humanist culture, which primarily was in the Italian city-states, at least at first. And this produced secular models for individual and political behaviors. This is very, very important, this revival of classical texts, okay? Now, we also have the invention of the printing press that we need to talk about. This promoted the dissemination of new ideas. So the invention of the printing press in the 1450s aided in the spreading of the Renaissance beyond Italy. But most importantly, it encouraged the growth of vernacular literature. What's vernacular? It's basically the word for the language of the common people, or the common language. And this development of the vernacular would eventually contribute to the development of national cultures. This will become particularly important when our discussion shifts later on to a discussion of nationalism. So Protestant reformers also utilized the printing press very successfully. They used it to disseminate their ideas. This helped to spur religious reform and also helped the Reformation become widely established throughout Europe. It's very, very important. Printing press, revolutionary invention. The visual arts, very, very important, also incorporated the new ideas of the Renaissance and were used to promote personal, political, and religious goals. So virtually everybody except the common people were using the visual arts to promote their own ideas. So princes and popes, concerned with enhancing their prestige and their power, they commissioned paintings and architectural works based on classical styles, often employing the newly invented technique of geometric perspective. This is a very, very important invention or innovation within the visual arts. You should know what that is. Also, a human-centered naturalism that considered individuals in everyday life as appropriate subjects of artistic representation. That was encouraged through the patronage of both princes and the commercial elite. So they had the money, honey. You know the saying, whoever has the money makes the rules. Well, now we have not just the political elite, but because of this development of this emerging middle class, this mercantilist class, you have commercially rich folks that become the commercial elite, and they are also engaging in this process. Mannerist and Baroque artists also employed distortion, drama, and illusion in works that were commissioned by monarchies, city-states, and the church for public buildings in order to promote their own stature and power. Very, very important stuff, visual arts. Now, at this time, also, new ideas in science that were based on observation, experimentation, and mathematics challenged classical views of the cosmos, nature, and the human body. Although it should be noted that folk traditions of knowledge and of the universe did persist amongst the peasants. So new ideas and methods in astronomy led individuals such as Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton to question the authority of the ancients and religion, and to develop a heliocentric view of the universe. Heliocentric versus geocentric. You should understand that debate's very important. You should know both of those terms. Now, anatomical and medical discoveries by physicians, including William Harvey, actually presented the body as an integrated system, which directly challenged the previously held ideas of the traditional humoral theory, the idea of the four humors of the body and disease. And this was espoused by Galen. Okay. Now, Francis Bacon and Rene Descartes also modified philosophical reasoning and how we approach thought, right? So Francis Bacon should be associated with inductive reasoning. Rene Descartes should be associated with deductive reasoning. Both of these things promoted experimentation and the use of mathematics. Both of those things would ultimately shape the scientific method, which governs so much of our society today. Alchemy and astronomy, or astrology rather, continued to appeal to the elites and to some natural philosophers, in part because they shared with the new science the notion of a predictable and knowable universe. This is in stark contrast to the oral culture of peasants, where the belief dominated or persisted that the cosmos were governed by divine and demonic forces. Now, key concept 1.2. We're going to talk about the struggle for sovereignty within and among states. This resulted in varying degrees of political centralization. Political centralization, very important for this era that we're discussing. So this new concept of the sovereign state and also secular systems of law played central roles in the creation of new political institutions. So we have new monarchies that laid the foundation for the centralized modern state, or the modern nation state, by establishing monopoly on tax collection, military force, and also the dispensing of justice. Further, they gained the right to determine the religion of their subjects, thus taking power away from the church and giving themselves more power. The Peace of Westphalia in 1649, very, very important, which marked the effective end of the medieval ideal of universal Christendom. This accelerated the decline of the Holy Roman Empire by granting princes and bishops and other local leaders control over religion. So this further reduced the church's power. Now, across Europe, commercial and professional groups, again with the economics, he who has the money helps to make the rules, they also gained in political power, and they played a greater role in political affairs. Now, secular political theories, such as those espoused in Machiavelli, the Prince, very important. This provided a new concept of the state and how to run it. Now, the competitive state system also led to new patterns of diplomacy and new forms of warfare. So after the Peace of Westphalia, religion no longer was the cause for warfare among European states. But that didn't mean they weren't going to war, right? We know this. They went to war all the time. So instead, the concept of the balance of power, of no one state having more power than any of the others, played an important role in structuring diplomatic and military objectives. When you think balance of power, think Italian city-states. Very, very important. Also, advances in military technology, otherwise known as the Military Revolution, led to the following things. New forms of warfare, including greater reliance on infantry, firearms, the mobile cannon, and more elaborate fortifications. This was all financed by heavier taxation, which required a large bureaucrat and an even larger bureaucracy. Technology, tactics, and strategies also tipped the balance of power towards states who were able to marshal sufficient resources for this new military experiment. The more centralized and stronger your power was as a monarch, the better able you were to marshal these resources. So the competition for power between monarchs and corporate groups also produced different distributions of governmental authority in European states. We should recall Oliver Cromwell and Charles I, the English Civil War, which was a conflict between the monarchy, parliament, and other elites over their respective roles in the political structure. And the English Civil War exemplified this competition between those two groups, the landed aristocracy, or the nobility, versus the monarch. Monarchs seeking to enhance power also faced challenges from nobles who wished to retain those traditional forms of shared governance and regional autonomy. Now let's move into key concept 1.3. Religious pluralism challenged the concept of a unified Europe. This would have religious, social, cultural, and political implications, in addition to economic, actually. But the Protestant and Catholic Reformations, or the Catholic Counter-Reformation, fundamentally changed the theology, religious institutions, and culture of European society. So first off, Christian humanism, which was embodied in the writings of Erasmus, employed Renaissance learning in the service of religious reform. He argued quite vehemently against Martin Luther and John Calvin, who wanted to completely obliterate the Catholic Church entirely. I hope you'll recall that Erasmus and Martin Luther had a series of very interesting back and forth essay writing that where Martin Luther got a little bit nasty. But You should look that up if you haven't read it already. It's good times. So reformers Martin Luther and John Calvin, as well as religious radicals such as the Anabaptists, criticized Catholic abuses and established new interpretations of Christian doctrine and practice. John Calvin went as far as to develop his own city, his own mini-state that was completely governed by religion with himself as the head. That was in Geneva, Switzerland. The Catholic Reformation, or Counter-Reformation, exemplified by the Jesuit order and the Council of Trent, revived the church, but it also cemented that division within Christianity. It would not compromise with the Protestants. Religious reform both increased state control of religious institutions and provided justifications for challenging state authority. So monarchs and princes such as English rulers Henry VIII and Elizabeth I initiated vast religious reform from the top down in an effort to exercise greater control over religious life and morality. But some Protestants, including Calvin and the Anabaptists, refused to recognize the subordination of the church to the state. And religious conflicts became a basis for challenging the monarch's control of religious institutions. Conflicts among religious groups overlapped with political and economic competition within and among the states. So issues of religious reform exacerbated or made worse conflicts between the monarchy and the nobility, as in the French Wars of Religion, as we should all know. The efforts of the Habsburg rulers failed to restore Catholic unity across Europe. Epic fail. We've all talked about this, the Holy Roman Empire, epic fail. States exploited these religious conflicts to promote their own political and economic interests. And even a few states, such as France with the Edict of Nantes, allowed some religious pluralism in order to maintain domestic peace. I would argue that Elizabeth I also engaged in some of this compromise in some religious pluralism. Despite the fact that the Church of England was the official religion of English society, of the English state, Elizabeth still allowed Catholics to remain in the country and to practice in an effort to calm down some of these domestic tensions. And she was remarkably successful at that. That is the end of part 1. I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you in part 2.